Hey there. If you are taking the digital SAT soon, you have come to the right video. We are going to talk about 2 reading and writing questions that you absolutely don't want to miss. So let's begin. Let's do the first question then. This is from the Standard English Conventions. Now it says, in the realm of scientific discovery, Isaac Newton's groundbreaking work in physics and mathematics revolutionized our understanding of the universe. He was not alone in his pursuits, however. Another luminary of the Enlightenment era, Galileo Galilei, made significant contributions to the advancement of human knowledge. Now we need to figure out what goes here, which is grammatically correct or follows the conventions of Standard English. Now notice we have the adverb, however. Usually, however, is bunched off with punctuations, is set off with punctuations. But we are not sure which punctuation is the right one to use in this example. Okay, let's just recap some of the concepts for this question. So, this is a question that involves a transition, and we know that however is a contrast transition, right? It's not a support or a causal transition. It clearly indicates some sort of contrast. So, usually you would see one sentence, you would see however, and the second sentence, and we usually assume the second sentence is somewhat of a contrast to the first sentence. But remember that on the SAT, some of the more difficult questions would place the transition somewhere else, right? So instead of the standard format of sentence 1, transition sentence 2, you could see something like this: sentence 1, sentence 2, and transition either in the middle of sentence 2 or even at the end of sentence 2, right? But as long as it's part of sentence 2, the transition is usually referring to the logical link between sentence 1 and sentence 2 and not referring to sentence 3, right? So if you have a transition inside sentence 2 or at the end of sentence 2 but before the period or semicolon, it's really referring to the logical transition from sentence 1 to sentence 2. So let's just look at an example for this to be very clear. So one version of this sentence is, therefore, tropical marine mammals have very few fat reserves in their bodies. This same sentence with the transition can also be written as, tropical marine mammals therefore have very few fat reserves in their bodies, right? Both these sentences have the exact same meaning, and they are transitioning from something that would have been written before this, not something that's written after this, because therefore does not appear right at the beginning of the sentence. It appears in the middle, right? So what could it have been if tropical marine mammals have very fat reserves in their bodies and something is causing it, right? Versus if the marine mammal are, say, not tropical or in the or say in the higher latitudes, maybe they don't have fat reserves in their bodies, right? So something would have caused the author to write this sentence and have a causality. But the thing to note is, irrespective of where therefore occurs, this is being logically connected to the sentence that would have preceded, not the one that follows this, right? So let's go back to our question here and let's see where however goes in. So the first sentence is, Isaac Newton's groundbreaking work revolutionized our understanding of the universe. However, he was not alone in his pursuits, right? Because this is showing some sort of a contrast, that he did a lot of groundbreaking work, but there were others, or someone else at least, who was also doing something similar, right? So the however, and let's also look at the third sentence. So, however, another luminary of the Enlightenment era, Galileo Galilei, made significant contributions to the advancement of human knowledge. Now, this sentence actually is a support to this one. He was not alone in his endeavors. Who else was there? Another luminary of the Enlightenment era, Galileo Galilei, also was there, right? So these two sentences are support. So, however, cannot be used as a logical transition between this sentence, he was not alone in his pursuits, and this sentence, another luminary of the Enlightenment era, Galileo, made significant contributions. This is basically a example, or it's basically supporting this line, right? So the contrast is really between this, let me choose a different color, right? Sentence, in the realm of scientific discovery, all the way to the universe, and this sentence that we have chosen in red. Okay, so the however should have come here, but it is not coming. But just as we showed, the however basically should be part of this sentence, right, and not the other. So now that is understood, what are the options we have, right? So however should basically be ending the sentence, and what are the ways to end sentence? Let's just quickly recap. Okay, so if we have two independent clauses or two complete sentences, so what are independent clauses? They have a subject and they have a finite verb, and basically they can stand as a sentence on its own. So basically the independent clause can also stand as a sentence on its own. So something like he is running, not he running or he to run, right? But he is running, because this is a conjugated verb. This can stand as an independent clause on its own, right? And once you have independent clauses, there are only 3 acceptable ways of linking those 2 independent clauses. So what are those ways? One is just using punctuation. So you don't do anything with the independent clause, let them remain separate, but just add a punctuation. The 2 acceptable punctuations are semicolon and period. They basically do the same thing, right? Semicolon in this scenario is equal to period. And remember, you will never be tested on the difference between semicolon and period in these kind of scenarios. So if you see options where semicolon and period are used interchangeably, like you have 2 things that are same and one option ends with semicolon, one ends with period, both are wrong. Because one of them, there can be just one right answer, so both of them are wrong. The third acceptable way to link 2 independent clauses is you write one independent clause, you follow it with the coordinating conjunction and another independent clause. So, and they are separated by a comma. So what are these coordinating conjunctions? These could be for, and, right, and yet, so, or, right? So these are some of the coordinating conjunctions that you can use, right? So just remember, if you see a coordinating conjunction, you can use this format: independent clause, comma, coordinating conjunction, independent clause. That's one way of linking, where some of these coordinating conjunction kind of also help logically link the 2 independent clauses. But if you don't want to logically link it, you could simply put a period or a semicolon. Okay, so once we know this, let's just go back to the question. We established that we have to separate this yellow underlined sentence and this red underlined sentence with, and this has to be followed by however. But this red underlined sentence has to be separated from the third sentence, which is basically another luminary of the Enlightenment era, Galileo, made significant contributions to the advancement of human knowledge, right? So these 3 sentences have to be separated, and the only way to do it is, we just need to see whether this is also independent, right? So he was not alone in his pursuits. Is independent. Correct? Conjugated verb, enough to make it independent. This one, another luminary of the Enlightenment era, this is a modifier. Galileo is the subject and made significant contributions. Galileo made. So you have a subject, you have a conjugated verb, you have things following it. So this itself is an independent clause along with its modifier, right? So this whole thing is an independent clause. This is also an independent clause. So the only way to link this first independent clause and the other independent clause is either using a semicolon, a period, or a coordinating conjunction which is missing. However, is not a coordinating conjunction, and anyway it's part of the first independent clause. So any option that you see which has semicolon or period following however would be the right option. So in any case, I would choose this, but let's just go through the options. He was not alone in his pursuits, however another. So this is basically one independent clause being linked to another independent clause using however, which is an adverb, not a coordinating conjunction. This is wrong. Pursuits, however, and plus it's not even set off. This is doing the same thing. It has set it off, but you can't link 2 independent clauses with this. This one was right. Here they are basically saying the independent clause ends at pursuit and however is another independent clause, but we just showed earlier that this however has to be part of this red underlined independent clause and not part of the green one, right? So this is wrong. So C is the right answer. The second question that we'll do in this video is from the inferences section. Okay, so we have a passage here and we want to logically complete the text. Before we dive deep into this question, let's look at what is the right approach to such questions. Okay, so if these are questions on science or social science, it's important to just figure out or rephrase or paraphrase what's given as bullet points. So what is the premise and what's the premise, and the conclusion is not given, but what conclusion could that premise lead? Now, unlike some of the other questions on digital sat on the verbal section, you may need a certain leap of logic, right? A very little leap of logic. In most other cases, the answers are very direct. What's in the text is in the answer, but you may require a very small leap of logic. But you also need to be careful that the leap of logic is very, very small, right? You can't make a major leap of logic because then any answer could be correct. right? So you're only looking for choices, answer choices that are repeated verbatim, so have synonyms from something that's given in the text, or at the very least is demonstrated by the passage. And then you can make a slight leap of logic in arriving at the answer. Okay, so let's go through the passage that we have here. Let's also keep making notes, whatever we see. So, and usually remember, some of the science or social science passages would have a structure which is like an old idea versus new idea, right? So they would talk about something that was widely believed, was an old idea, and then they introduce some new observation or study, and then they say that people are now thinking this way, or it's a new idea, right? So let's read it. One theory behind human bipedalism speculates that it originated in a mostly ground-based ancestor that practiced four-legged knuckle walking, like chimpanzees and gorillas do today, right? So what's important is the premise is human bipedalism, right? And its origin. The speculation is that it originated in a ground-based ancestor that was four-legged, right? And eventually evolved into moving upright on two legs, which is what bipedalism is. So the origin is ground-based ancestor that practiced four-leg walking. But recently, so this is the new idea, researchers observed orangutans, right? So not chimpanzees and gorillas, orangutans, another relative of humans, standing on two legs on three branches and using their arms for balance while they reached for fruits. So researchers basically saw some form of bipedalism on tree, not yet on ground. Eventually bipedalism is when you are walking everywhere and not using your four limbs to walk. But another relative of humans, orangutan, was seen demonstrating some form of bipedalism, at least on trees, right? When they were using their arms for balance while they reached for fruits. These observations may suggest that. So now we need to go through the answers and see what's directly stated, how much can we infer. But let's do a concept recap to see what are the wrong questions that can come. Right? The most important thing on any reading section, or any section for that matter on digital sat, is remember there is always only one correct answer. Right? 3 answers are wrong. Those who are setting the question, they are trying to create these traps where you somehow feel that the wrong answer could be right. But you have to find why an answer is wrong. And the more you practice, I would highly recommend, even the wrong answers, just in your mind, just make sure you are saying it loud. Why do you think that answer is wrong? So that you start identifying wrong answers also, apart from just identifying the right answer. Right? So once you are very good at identifying why an answer is wrong, that just gives you immense confidence in choosing the right answer. And that helps a lot. So what are the common wrong answer traps? Okay, so an answer choice where most of the things are correct, but 1 or 2 words is wrong, and that's obviously wrong. Something that's barely relevant, right? Statements that would be valid literary interpretations in a classroom, right? So something happened, but you're making a literary interpretation, but not directly demonstrated or stated in the passage. Reasonable statements that aren't in the text, so you would think, okay, this may be true in the real life, but they are not in the text, so that cannot be an answer. And the easy ones are direct contradictions. So you read something like, because of X, Y happened, but it says, because X did not happen, so Y happened. So that's a direct contradiction. Confused relationships, again, X did Y, or X did something to Y, but an answer says Y did something to X. So that, and if you haven't read it very properly and not taken notes, you would think, okay, you read something like that, right? And finally, restatement or demonstration of the wrong part of the passage. So the question asks something else and some other part of the passage is restated, and you somehow feel, okay, I read this, so maybe this is the right answer. Right? So these are some of the common ways to trap, that College Board would try to trap you with a wrong answer. Okay, now let's go back to this question. Just a brief recap. Original theory was human bipedalism originated in ground-based ancestors through four-legged knuckle walking, but recent research shows orangutans were standing on 2 legs on tree branches and using their arms for balance while they reached for fruits. So maybe perhaps bipedalism did originate and had something to do with this instead of ground-based ancestors. So let's see what these observations may suggest. The first choice says bipedalism evolved because it was advantageous to a tree-dwelling ancestor of humans. Okay, so it's saying something about bipedalism evolution. That's what the premise was. So not very bad. And also referring to tree-dwelling ancestor of humans. So I'll keep this as an option for the time being. Let's revisit it later. Okay, so this seems fine. Bipedalism must have evolved simultaneously with knuckle walking and tree climbing, right? So absolutely general statement. There is nothing in the passage about simultaneous evolution, right? So this is something you should clearly cut out. Moving between the ground and the trees would have been difficult without bipedalism. Now again, this is something, right? It makes sense. Moving between the ground and the trees would have been difficult. Very general statement, it absolutely makes sense, but the passage doesn't talk about the difficulty from moving to ground, right? So again, irrelevant. A knuckle walking human ancestor could have easily moved bipedally in trees, right? So the passage demonstrates that orangutan, which would have otherwise been knuckle walking, but when they would go to trees, they could move easily, right? So the passage says everything, and this is also something that is not very off. So let's go back to A and D again. So A says bipedalism evolved because of it was advantageous to a tree-dwelling ancestor of humans, right? It says something very specific, advantageous to a tree-dwelling ancestor of humans. Okay. Now it's using very specific. Does the passage at any point say something about an advantage, right? If we go and read this, orangutans standing on two legs on tree branches and using their arms for balance while they reached for fruits, right? So it did give an advantage to orangutans because they were able to use the two arms for balance while they reached for. So it gave an advantage, right? So it basically is true to what my premise was, how bipedalism evolved, and it's also stating something that's written in the last rank, right? So it's a very strongly, it's an answer that's restating something, right? It's just restating. There is no massive inference you're drawing. Yes, should we call their ability to use their arms for balance while they reach for fruits, right, an advantage? Yeah, that's the inference we are making. So this clearly looks like the right answer. Now let's just revisit D for a second. Could have easily moved bipedally in trees, right? So this is not impossible to think, right? Orangutans are able to move, but there is this word, could have easily moved. This is not there in the passage. Nowhere it talks about were orangutans able to move easily. What it talks about is they had an advantage in reaching out for fruit because they showed bipedal behavior on trees, right? Which is why A comes D. Easily moved. This one word is kind of making this answer wrong. Okay, so A is the right answer. Again, just to recap, be very sure what the wrong answers look like, and when you're practicing questions, in your own words, make sure you are summarizing why you are crossing off an answer, so that when you're doing it on the actual test, you are very easily able to do it and choose the right answer with confidence, right? You're not dilly-dallying between A and D, and sometimes you choose D and end up getting your marks deducted. Alright, so that brings us to the end of this video. Those were the two questions we discussed in this video today. If you like the channel, do consider subscribing it for more such videos. And remember, if you master the concepts, you can solve anything.